They say love conquers all, but nobody tells you what happens when the man you've loved for 45 years looks at you one morning, and you realize he's been looking through you for months. I'm 72 years old, and I thought I knew everything about heartbreak. I was wrong. The worst kind of heartbreak isn't when love dies suddenly, it's when you discover it's been dying slowly, quietly while you weren't paying attention, and someone else has been there to catch it as it fell. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of what can happen in long marriages when we stop truly seeing each other. Now let me tell you what really happened. My name is Margaret Thompson, but everyone calls me Maggie. I've been married to Richard Rick for 45 years this October. We have 2 grown children, 4 grandchildren, and a small colonial house on Maple Street where we've lived for 30 years. Up until 6 months ago, I would have told you we had a good marriage. Not perfect, mind you, but good. Comfortable. The kind where you finish each other's sentences and know exactly how the other person likes their coffee. I should have known something was wrong when Rick started drinking his coffee black. It was a Tuesday morning in March when I first noticed it. I'd gotten up early, as I always do, to make breakfast. Rick liked 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast lightly buttered, and coffee with cream and 2 sugars. He'd been having the same breakfast for 45 years. But that morning, when I set his cup down, he pushed the cream away. "Just black today, Maggie," he said without looking up from his newspaper. I stood there holding the little ceramic pitcher my mother had given us as a wedding gift, watching him sip his coffee and make a face like he was tasting medicine. "You feeling all right, honey?" I asked. "Fine," he said, still not looking at me. "Just trying to cut back on calories." Rick had never worried about calories in his life. At 74, he was still the same lanky man I'd married, with just a small belly that came from years of my pot roasts and apple pies. But I didn't say anything. After 45 years of marriage, you learn to pick your battles. Over the next few weeks, there were other small changes. Rick started taking longer showers and using a new cologne, something spicy and expensive, smelling that made me sneeze when I hugged him goodbye. He'd always been a creature of habit, wearing the same Old Spice aftershave since our honeymoon, so this change felt strange. Then there were the phone calls. Rick had retired from his insurance office 5 years ago, and his phone rarely rang except for the occasional call from our son Michael or our daughter Sarah. But suddenly, his phone was buzzing constantly. He'd glance at it, smile slightly, a smile I hadn't seen in years, and then excuse himself to take the call in his study. "Who was that?" I'd ask when he returned. "Oh, just Jim from the office," he'd say. Or Bob from the golf course. Or Tom from church, always someone male. Always someone whose call apparently required privacy. I tried to push down the little voice in my head that whispered something wasn't right. This was Rick, my Rick. The man who'd held my hand through 2 difficult pregnancies, who'd worked extra shifts to pay for the kids' college, who'd cried with me when we lost our parents. The man who still sometimes reached for my hand while watching television. But that little voice grew louder when I started noticing his absences. "I'm going to run some errands," became his favorite phrase. Rick, who had always hated shopping and would rather wear holes in his shoes than spend a Saturday at the mall, was suddenly running errands 3 times a week. He'd be gone for hours, returning with nothing more than a gallon of milk or a loaf of bread, things that could have been purchased in 10 minutes at the corner store. "Where did you go today?" I'd ask. "Oh, you know. The grocery store, the bank, drove around a bit. Traffic was terrible." But his clothes never smelled like the grocery store or the bank. They smelled like that new cologne and something else, something floral and unfamiliar. The breaking point came on a Thursday in April. I was dusting Rick's study. It's something I did once a week while he was out on his mysterious errands. As I moved his jacket from the back of his chair, something crinkled in the pocket. Without thinking, I reached in and pulled out a small piece of paper. It was folded neatly, written in elegant handwriting that definitely wasn't Rick's. "Thank you for yesterday. You make me feel alive again." "Do you?" I stood in that study for what felt like hours, holding that piece of paper, reading those 10 words over and over again. "You make me feel alive again." What did that mean about me? About us? About our 45 years together? My hands were shaking as I carefully refolded the note and placed it back in Rick's pocket exactly where I'd found it. I finished dusting mechanically, my mind racing. Who was Dee? What happened yesterday? And why did reading those words feel like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart until it couldn't beat properly? That night, Rick came home with Chinese takeout, my favorite from Wong's Garden, and acted like nothing had changed. He asked about my day, told me about the traffic on Main Street, and settled into his recliner to watch the news. I watched him from the kitchen doorway, this man I'd loved for most of my adult life, and wondered when he'd become a stranger. "Rick," I said softly. He didn't look away from the television. "Do you remember our first apartment? That little place above the bakery?" Now he looked at me, his brow furrowed. "Of course I remember. Why? You used to say I made you feel alive. Do you remember that?" Something flickered across his face, guilt, maybe, or sadness. For a moment, I thought he might tell me everything. But then he smiled, that polite, distant smile I'd been seeing more of lately. "That was a long time ago, Maggie. We were different people then. Were we?" I asked. "Did we just stop paying attention to who we still were?" Rick turned back to the television. "I don't know what you want me to say." That night, I lay awake listening to Rick's steady breathing and staring at the ceiling. 45 years ago, we'd promised to love each other in sickness and in health, for better or for worse. But nobody had prepared us for this, for the slow, quiet erosion of a marriage, for the way love could fade so gradually that you didn't notice until it was almost gone. I thought about the note in Rick's pocket, about some woman whose initial was D, who could make my husband feel alive when apparently I no longer could. Part of me wanted to pretend I'd never found it, to go back to our quiet, comfortable routine and hope that whatever this was would pass. But another part of me, a part that had been sleeping for years, was waking up. And that part was angry, not screaming, throwing dishes angry, quietly, dignifiedly angry. The kind of anger that comes from realizing you've been taking care of everyone else for so long that you forgot to take care of yourself. The kind that whispers, "You deserve better than this." As I finally drifted off to sleep, I made a decision. I was going to find out who Dee was, and then I was going to figure out what I was going to do about it. After all, if Rick could start making changes at 74, so could I. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in 20 years. I called in sick to my volunteer work at the library. Not because I was physically ill, but because I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out how a 72-year-old woman goes about uncovering her husband's affair. Rick left for his errands at 10 o'clock sharp, whistling as he backed out of the driveway. I watched from behind our lace curtains as he drove away, noting that he'd taken extra care with his appearance, his best polo shirt, the cologne, and was that gel in his hair. As soon as his car disappeared around the corner, I called my best friend Eleanor Martinez. Ellie and I had been neighbors for 20 years, ever since she and her late husband Carlos moved in next door. She was a retired nurse, practical as they come, and the only person I trusted with this mess. "Maggie, what's wrong?" Ellie's voice was sharp with concern. She knew I never called before noon. It was an unspoken rule between us, respecting each other's morning routines. "Ellie, I need to come over. Can you put on a pot of coffee?" "Of course, honey. Come right over." 5 minutes later, I was sitting at Ellie's kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a warm mug, trying to find the words to explain what I was afraid of. "Rick's having an affair," I said finally, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. Ellie's coffee mug stopped halfway to her lips. She set it down carefully and reached across the table to take my hand. "What makes you think that, Mija?" I told her everything: the black coffee, the cologne, the mysterious errands, the phone calls, and finally, the note. Ellie listened without interruption, her dark eyes growing more serious with each detail. "Have you confronted him?" she asked when I finished. "No. I don't know what to say. What if I'm wrong? What if there's some innocent explanation?" Ellie gave me the look she'd probably given countless patients over the years, kind but direct. "Maggie, honey, you've been married to that man for 45 years. You know when something's not right. But what if I'm right? What then? Do I pack his bags? Throw him out? At our age, is it better to just pretend it's not happening? Is that what you want to do? Pretend?" I thought about it, really thought about it. Could I go back to making Rick his breakfast, washing his clothes, sharing our bed, all while knowing he was sharing himself with someone else? Could I smile and nod when he told me about his day, knowing he was editing out the most important parts? "No," I said quietly. "I can't pretend. But I need to know for sure. I need to know who she is, how long it's been going on, and I paused, surprised by my own words. I need to know if there's any part of our marriage worth saving. Ellie squeezed my hand. Then we need a plan. We spent the next hour plotting like a couple of teenage girls planning to sneak out. Ellie would drive me to follow Rick on his next errand run. We'd park far enough away to avoid detection, but close enough to see where he went and who he met. This feels so ridiculous, I said as we finalized our spy mission. I'm 72 years old. I should be planning garden parties and knitting sweaters for my grandchildren, not following my husband around town. Age doesn't make betrayal hurt less, Ellie said simply. And you have every right to know the truth about your own life. The next day, Friday, Rick announced he was going out for errands again. This time I was ready. I think I'll visit Ellie today, I told him casually as he adjusted his collar in the hallway mirror. That's nice, dear. You two have a good time. The ease with which he dismissed me, the relief in his voice that I'd be occupied, hurt more than I expected. 20 minutes after Rick left, Ellie picked me up in her blue Honda. We drove to the center of town and parked across from the coffee shop where Rick often went. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. What if he sees us? I whispered, as if Rick could hear me from 3 blocks away. He won't? He's not looking for us. We waited for nearly an hour. I was starting to think maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe Rick really was just running innocent errands when Ellie grabbed my arm. There, she said, pointing. Rick's car was pulling into the parking lot of Sunrise Cafe, a little place I'd never been to. He parked, got out, and smoothed down his hair. Then he walked to the entrance and held the door open. For a woman. She was younger than me, maybe early 50s, with shoulder-length blonde hair and a figure that suggested she spent time at the gym. She was wearing a flowing sundress in soft blue, and when Rick's hand touched her lower back as they entered the cafe together, she leaned into him slightly. The casual intimacy of that gesture, the way she moved toward him, the way his hand lingered, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a chance encounter or a business meeting. This was a woman who was comfortable with my husband's touch. Oh, honey, Ellie breathed beside me. I sat in that car, staring at the cafe where my husband was having what looked like a very cozy lunch with another woman, and felt something break inside me. Not shatter dramatically, but crack quietly, like ice on a pond when the weather starts to warm. I want to see them, I heard myself say. Maggie, no. That's not a good idea. I need to see them together. I need to see how he looks at her. Against Ellie's protests, I got out of the car and walked toward the cafe. The windows were large, and I could see Rick and the woman seated at a corner table. They were leaning toward each other, talking intimately. Rick was smiling, really smiling, in a way I hadn't seen in years. As I watched, the woman reached across the table and placed her hand over Rick's. He turned his hand palm up and intertwined their fingers. She laughed at something he said, and he laughed too, his eyes bright with genuine joy. I stood on that sidewalk for maybe 2 minutes, watching my husband of 40, 5 years, hold hands and share secrets with another woman, and I felt the last of my illusions crumble away. But here's what surprised me underneath the hurt and betrayal. I felt something else. Relief. Relief that I wasn't crazy, that my instincts had been right. Relief that I finally knew the truth, instead of living with the constant anxiety of suspicion. And strangest of all, relief to see Rick happy, even if it wasn't with me. When had we stopped making each other laugh like that? When had holding hands become something we only did at church or crossing busy streets? When had we become 2 people who shared a house but not a life? I walked back to Ellie's car with steady steps. She took one look at my face and started the engine without a word. Her name starts with D, I said as we drove home. The woman from the note. Did you recognize her? No. But she's not from around here originally. I would have remembered her. I paused, thinking. She looked nice, happy. Younger than me but not young enough to be his daughter. Pretty in a natural way. Ellie glanced at me with concern. How are you doing, really? I considered the question seriously. How was I doing? I just confirmed that my husband was cheating on me with a woman who made him smile like he was 30 again. I should have been devastated. I'm angry, I said finally. But not the way I expected to be. I'm not angry that he found someone who makes him happy. I'm angry that he didn't have the courage to tell me. I'm angry that he's making me into the fool who doesn't know what her own husband is up to. I'm angry that instead of talking to me about whatever was missing from our marriage, he just replaced me We sat in my driveway for a few minutes before I got out of the car. "What are you going to do?" Ellie asked. "I don't know yet. But I'm going to do something. I'm too old to waste whatever years I have left being lied to." That evening, Rick came home with a bouquet of grocery store flowers, daisies and carnations. The kind he'd brought me for 45 years. But now, instead of seeing them as a sweet gesture, I wondered if they were bought out of guilt. "What's the occasion?" I asked, arranging them in a vase. "No occasion. Just thought you'd like them." I looked at this man I'd loved for so long. This stranger who was trying to ease his conscience with $5 flowers while he held another woman's hand in public. "They're lovely, Rick. Thank you." But as I put the vase on the kitchen table, I made another decision. I was going to find out everything I could about this woman, about how long this had been going on, and about what Rick's plans were. Because if he thought he could have both worlds, his comfortable home with me, and his exciting romance with her, he was about to learn otherwise. After 45 years of putting Rick's needs first, it was time to think about what I needed. And what I needed was the truth, the whole truth. Even if it destroyed everything I thought I knew about my life. The investigation was just beginning. Over the weekend, I found myself studying Rick like he was a puzzle I was trying to solve. How long had he been pretending? When he kissed my cheek goodbye, was he thinking about her? When he sat across from me at dinner, was he comparing my conversation to hers? The worst part was how normal he acted. Saturday morning, he helped me with the grocery shopping, just like always. He pushed the cart while I checked items off my list. And we fell into our usual rhythm, him reaching for items on high shelves, me organizing everything in the cart the way I liked it. "Don't forget we need milk," he said as we passed the dairy section. "Already got it," I replied automatically. For a moment, it felt like any other Saturday from the past 30 years. But then his phone buzzed, and I saw that familiar smile cross his face as he read the message. "Just give me a second," he said, stepping away to respond. I watched him type carefully, his whole face softening as he crafted his reply. When he rejoined me, he was humming under his breath. That's when I realized something that chilled me. Rick wasn't miserable about cheating on me. He wasn't torn up with guilt or struggling with his conscience. He was happy. Happier than I'd seen him in years. Sunday morning, Rick announced he was going to play golf with the guys, something he hadn't done in months. As soon as he left, I called Ellie. "I need to find out who she is," I told her. "Her name, where she lives, how they met, everything." "How are we going to do that?" "I have an idea. Can you meet me at the library in an hour?" Ellie didn't ask questions. That's one of the things I loved about her. She trusted that if I had a plan, it was worth following. At the library, I sat down at one of the public computers. My volunteer work there had taught me more about internet research than Rick knew. I started with the basics, searching for recent newcomers to our town, looking through social media pages, checking real estate records for new residents. "What exactly are we looking for?" Ellie asked, pulling up a chair beside me. "A woman whose name starts with D, probably in her 50s, blonde, new to the area." I paused, thinking about what else I'd observed. "She dresses well, takes care of herself, and she's probably single or recently divorced." It took 2 hours, but we found her. Diana Walsh. 50, 2 years old, moved to Willowbrook 6 months ago from Chicago. According to her Facebook profile, she was recently widowed. Her husband had died of cancer the year before. She'd moved here to be closer to her sister and for a fresh start. Her photos showed a woman who was dealing with grief, but trying to embrace life again. There were pictures of her hiking, trying new restaurants, taking art classes at the community center. And there, 3 weeks ago, was a photo that made my stomach clench. Diana at our town's spring festival, smiling brightly, with Rick visible in the background. "Oh, Maggie," Ellie whispered. The caption read, "So grateful for new friendships and unexpected joy. Willowbrook is starting to feel like home. New friendship. Unexpected joy." I scrolled through more photos, looking for clues about when this had started. There, a picture from the community center's art show 2 months ago. Diana standing next to a watercolor painting of our town's main street, holding a small blue ribbon. 3rd place. I remembered that art show. Rick had come with me, something he rarely did for community events. He'd complained about being bored, wandered around while I chatted with friends, and then suggested we leave early. "I think I need some air," he'd said. "Meet you at the car in 10 minutes. Now I wondered if he'd met Diana that night. If while I was admiring quilts and pottery, My husband was falling in love with a widow who painted watercolors and won third-place ribbons. She seems nice, Ellie said quietly. And that was the terrible truth, she did seem nice. Her posts were thoughtful, not attention-seeking. She shared articles about grief counseling and supporting friends through loss. She volunteered at the animal shelter. She posted pictures of books she was reading and flowers from her garden. She wasn't some predatory woman hunting for married men. She was a lonely widow trying to rebuild her life. Just like Rick was a restless husband feeling invisible in his own marriage. That didn't make it hurt less, but it made it more complicated. I spent the rest of Sunday thinking about Diana Walsh and what she represented. She was everything I wasn't anymore: new, exciting, full of possibilities. She was someone Rick could be a different version of himself with, someone who didn't know about his bad knee, or his terrible jokes, or the way he left coffee rings on the furniture. With me, Rick was settled, predictable, taken for granted. With Deanna, he could be charming and mysterious and romantic again. Monday morning brought a new development. Rick announced he was joining the community center's hiking group. "Since when do you like hiking?" I asked. "I've been thinking I need more exercise. Getting outdoors, meeting people. It might be good for me." The hiking group that met every Tuesday and Thursday. The hiking group that, according to Facebook, Diana Walsh had joined the month before. "That sounds wonderful," I said, spreading jam on my toast with deliberate calm. "Maybe I should join too. It would be nice to get more exercise." The look of panic that flashed across Rick's face was so brief I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching for exactly that reaction. "Oh well, it's probably pretty challenging. Lots of steep trails. Maybe you should start with something easier. The walking group at the mall?" The walking group at the mall. Like I was some feeble old lady who couldn't handle a nature trail. "You're probably right," I said sweetly. "I wouldn't want to slow everyone down." Rick looked relieved, and I hated him a little bit for that relief. After he left for his first hike, I called our daughter Sarah in Portland. "Mom, what a nice surprise. How are you and Dad doing?" "We're fine." "Sweetheart, I was just wondering, when you and Tom were having those problems a few years ago, before you went to counseling, how did you know it was worth fighting for?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. Her marriage had gone through a rough patch when their youngest started college, but they'd worked through it. "Why are you asking, Mom? Is everything okay with you and Dad?" I could have told her everything right then. Sarah was a grown woman, a mother herself. She would have listened, offered support. Maybe even driven out from Portland to help me figure out what to do. But I wasn't ready to make this real to anyone else yet. Telling Sarah would mean admitting that the marriage she'd grown up in, the example of love and partnership she'd known her whole life, was falling apart. "Everything's fine," I lied. "I was just thinking about relationships in general. You know how it is when you get older, you start reflecting on things." Well, I knew it was worth fighting for because underneath all the problems, we still respected each other. We still wanted the same things, and we were both willing to do the work to fix it. After we hung up, I thought about what Sarah had said. Did Rick and I still respect each other? Did we want the same things? And most importantly, were we both willing to do the work? The answer to that last question was becoming clearer every day. Rick wasn't doing any work on our marriage. He was doing work on his relationship with Diana Walsh. That evening, Rick came home glowing from his hike, talking about the beautiful trails and the friendly people in the group. "There's this one woman, Diana," he said casually as he showered off his supposed outdoor adventure. "She's new in town, seems nice. Lost her husband recently. The group's been helping her get settled." My hands stilled on the dish I was washing. He was actually going to mention her. Part of me was almost impressed by the boldness of it. "That's thoughtful of you all," I managed to say. "She's having a hard time, you know. Starting over at our age isn't easy." Our age, she was 20 years younger than us. But apparently she and Rick were the same age when it came to starting over. "No," I agreed. "It isn't easy." Rick came into the kitchen, his hair still damp from his shower, smelling like his new cologne again. "Maybe sometime you'd like to meet her. I think you two would get along." The audacity of it took my breath away. He wanted me to meet his mistress. He wanted us all to be friends, probably so he could spend time with both of us without feeling guilty about lying. I turned to face him, this man I'd loved and trusted and built a life with, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. "That sounds lovely, Rick. I'd like that very much." His face lit up with what looked like genuine relief and happiness. "Really?" I thought you might enjoy having a new friend. She could probably use some female companionship. I'm sure she could, I said. When were you thinking we might arrange this meeting? Well, there's a group dinner planned for next Friday at Antonio's. Nothing fancy, just the hiking group getting together. Would you like to come? Antonio's, the Italian restaurant where Rick had taken me for our anniversary every year for the past decade, where he was now planning to take his wife and his mistress for a cozy group dinner. I'd love to, I said, and I meant it, because I had decided something in that moment. I was going to meet Diana Walsh. I was going to look her in the eye and see what kind of woman had stolen my husband's heart. I was going to watch Rick try to navigate having both of us in the same room. And then I was going to decide what to do with the rest of my life. The game was about to get very interesting. The week leading up to the dinner was the strangest of my marriage. Rick was practically bouncing with nervous energy, clearly excited about introducing the two most important women in his life to each other. He had no idea that I already knew exactly who Diana Walsh was. What should I wear Friday night? I asked him Thursday morning, watching him carefully. Oh, just something nice. Casual but nice. Diana mentioned she might wear that blue dress she bought last week. He caught himself, his face flushing slightly. I mean, the group was talking about what to wear. You know how these things go. No, Rick. I didn't know how these things went. I'd never tried to orchestrate a dinner between my spouse and my secret lover before. Friday evening, I stood in front of my closet for 20 minutes, thinking about armor. What does a woman wear to meet her husband's mistress? I finally chose a simple black dress, elegant, classic, dignified. The kind of dress that said I wasn't going to be dismissed easily. Rick was adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror when I came downstairs. He did a double take when he saw me. You look beautiful, Maggie. Really beautiful. For just a moment, I saw a flash of the man I'd married 45 years ago, the one who used to tell me I was beautiful, but he couldn't quite believe his luck. Then I remembered where we were going and why, and the moment passed. Antonio's was busy for a Friday night. The hiking group had pushed together 3 tables in the back corner, and there were about 12 people already seated when we arrived. My eyes went immediately to Diana. She was wearing the blue dress Rick had mentioned, a soft periwinkle that brought out her eyes. She looked nervous, fidgeting with her water glass and smiling too brightly at everyone around her. When she saw Rick walk in, her whole face lit up, and I watched my husband's expression mirror hers exactly. In that moment, seeing them look at each other like that, I finally understood the full scope of what I was dealing with. This wasn't just an affair or a midlife crisis. Rick was in love with this woman. Everyone, Rick said, his hand on my lower back, I'd like you to meet my wife, Maggie. The group welcomed me warmly, and I was introduced to retired teachers and accountants and bank managers, people my age who were trying to stay active and social. Normal people living normal lives, who had no idea they were background players in the drama unfolding at their dinner table. And this is Diana, Rick said when we reached her chair. Diana, my wife Maggie. Diana stood up to greet me, and I had to admit Rick had good taste. Up close, she was even prettier than her photos, with kind eyes and a genuine smile. She extended her hand to me with just the slightest tremor. Maggie, I'm so happy to meet you. Rick talks about you all the time. I'll bet he does, I thought, but I smiled and shook her hand. It's lovely to meet you too, Diana. Rick mentioned you're new to Willowbrook. Yes, I moved here 6 months ago. Still getting used to small town life, but everyone's been so welcoming. Especially my husband, I wanted to say. We sat down. Rick had somehow managed to arrange the seating so that Diana was directly across from him, with me to his right. Perfect positioning for him to gaze into her eyes while maintaining the pretense of including his wife in the conversation. As the evening progressed, I found myself in the strangest situation of my life. I was watching my husband flirt with another woman while trying to maintain normal dinner conversation with a group of strangers. Rick was working overtime to include me in discussions while simultaneously finding reasons to touch Diana's arm or laugh at her stories. Diana, to her credit, seemed genuinely uncomfortable with the situation, though I don't think she understood why. She kept trying to include me in her conversations with Rick, asking about my interests, complimenting my dress, making sure I didn't feel left out. She didn't know she was the reason I was being left out of my own marriage. Maggie, Rick tells me you volunteer at the library, Diana said during the main course. That must be so rewarding. It is. I've always loved books. and it's nice to help people find what they're looking for. What kind of books do you enjoy? Oh, all kinds. Mysteries, biographies, classic literature. Though lately I've been reading more about new beginnings. People who've had to start over later in life. Something flickered in Diana's eyes, and I wondered if she caught my meaning. That's something I've been thinking about a lot lately, she said softly. Starting over. It's terrifying and exciting at the same time. Yes, I agreed, looking directly at her. It takes courage to make big changes, especially when it means leaving comfortable situations behind. Rick was looking between us with growing unease, sensing undercurrents he couldn't quite identify. Well, you're both still young, he said with forced joviality. Plenty of time for new adventures. Deanna smiled at him, but I caught the brief confusion that crossed her face. Young? She was 52, I was 72. What were we both young for exactly? As the evening wore on, I found myself studying the dynamics at our table. Rick was trying to be three different people: the devoted husband for my benefit, the charming suitor for Diana's attention, and the casual friend for the group's perception. The effort was wearing on him. Diana kept glancing at me when she thought I wasn't looking, and I could see her trying to puzzle something out. She was smart enough to sense that something was off, but too polite or too uncertain to address it directly. And me, I was discovering something about myself I hadn't expected. I wasn't devastated anymore. I was fascinated. Watching Rick try to juggle his double life was like watching a very slow motion car accident. You knew it was going to end badly, but you couldn't look away. After dinner, as we all stood around in the parking lot saying our goodbyes, Diana approached me while Rick was talking to another member of the group. Maggie, I hope you'll join us on some of our hikes. It would be nice to have another woman in the group. That's very kind of you, Diana. Though I have to admit, I'm not much of a hiker these days. Neither was I when I started. But I've found that pushing yourself to try new things can be liberating. We looked at each other for a long moment, and I had the distinct impression we were talking about something other than hiking. Yes, I said finally. I imagine it can be. On the drive home, Rick was practically vibrating with nervous energy. So what did you think of everyone? Nice group, right? And Diana seemed to really like you? She seems lovely, Rick. Very genuine? She is. She's had a hard time since losing her husband. But she's got such a positive attitude. Really inspiring. I turned to look at my husband's profile as he drove, noting the way his voice softened when he talked about Diana's resilience, her positive attitude, her inspiring nature. Rick, I said quietly. Are you happy? The question seemed to catch him off guard. His hands tightened on the steering wheel, and he was quiet for several blocks. What do you mean? I mean, are you happy? With your life, with us? Another long pause. I don't know what brought this on, Maggie. Just answer the question. Are you happy with our marriage? He pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine, but didn't get out of the car immediately. In the dim light from the street lamp, I could see him struggling with something. We've been married for 45 years, he said finally. We have a good life? That's not what I asked. Rick turned to look at me then, and for a moment, I saw raw honesty in his face. I don't know, he said quietly. I don't know if I remember what happy feels like anymore. But you do remember with Deanna. The words hung in the air between us like a bomb that hadn't exploded yet. Rick's face went completely white. Maggie, I don't know what you... Rick, I kept my voice calm, steady. I know. He stared at me for what felt like forever. I could see him running through calculations how much I knew, how long I'd known it, what it meant for him. How long? He whispered. Long enough. I never meant for this to happen. But it did happen? Yes. We sat in our car in our driveway like two strangers who'd run out of things to say to each other. Which, I suppose, is exactly what we were. What happens now? Rick asked. I looked at our house, the place where we'd raised our children and celebrated anniversaries and planned for retirement. 45 years of shared history lived behind those walls. I don't know yet, I said truthfully. But Rick, yeah, whatever happens next, no more lies. I'm too old for lies. And so are you. He nodded, looking defeated and relieved at the same time. As we walked into our house together, I realized that meeting Diana had changed everything. Not because she was terrible, she wasn't. Not because she was some evil home wrecker, she clearly wasn't that either. Meeting Diana had changed everything because it showed me what I'd been missing. The way Rick looked at her, talked to her, listened to her. I couldn't remember the last time he'd done any of those things with me. And more importantly, I couldn't remember the last time I'd wanted him to. Somewhere along the way, Rick and I had stopped being husband and wife and started being roommates. The question now was whether that was something worth fixing or something we needed the courage to let go. The next morning, Rick and I moved around our kitchen like dancers who'd forgotten the choreography. He made coffee black for himself, cream and sugar for me while I prepared breakfast. We'd performed this routine thousands of times, but now it felt awkward, uncertain. "Maggie," Rick said as I set his plate down, "we need to talk?" "Yes," I agreed, sitting across from him at the table where we'd shared 45 years of meals. "We do. But neither of us seem to know where to start. How do you begin to untangle 4.5 decades of shared life? How do you explain how love can fade so gradually that you don't notice it's gone until someone else lights it up again?" Rick cleared his throat. "I want you to know that I never intended." "Don't," I interrupted gently. "Don't tell me what you didn't intend. Tell me what you did intend. Tell me what you want now." He looked up from his eggs, surprised by my directness. "I don't know what I want. Rick, you're 74 years old. You've been married to me for 45 years, and you've been having an affair for how long? 3 months? It started 3 months ago. 3 months. Not years of secret meetings and elaborate deceptions. 3 months of a lonely widow and a restless husband finding something in each other they'd both been missing. 3 months, I repeated. And in those 3 months, have you been happier?" He studied my face, probably trying to determine if this was a trap. "Yes," he said quietly, "I have been. And what does that tell you? That I'm a terrible husband. That I'm selfish and cruel and—" "Rick, stop." I reached across the table and touched his hand. "What it tells me is that we've both been sleepwalking through our marriage for years. You just woke up first." He stared at me with confusion. "I don't understand. Aren't you angry? Shouldn't you be throwing dishes at me or calling me names? Would that help?" "I don't know. It might make me feel like I deserved it." I sat back in my chair and really looked at my husband. When had he become this gray, uncertain man? When had I stopped seeing him as anything more than the person who lived in my house and shared my routine? "Rick, when was the last time you and I had a conversation about something other than groceries or doctor's appointments or what was on television?" He thought about it. "I don't remember." "Neither do I." "When was the last time we laughed together? Really laughed?" Another long pause. "I can't remember that either." "When was the last time you told me something that mattered to you? Or asked me about something that mattered to me?" "Maggie, what are you getting at?" I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at our backyard where we'd hosted barbecues and watched our grandchildren play. "I'm getting at the fact that we've been married for 45 years, but we stopped being partners somewhere along the way. We became efficient, polite, comfortable." "Is that so bad?" I turned to face him. "It is if it means we stopped growing free. It is if it means we started taking each other so much for granted that we became invisible to each other." Rick pushed his half-eaten breakfast away. "So what are you saying? That this is your fault too?" "I'm saying this is nobody's fault. And everybody's fault. I'm saying we both stopped trying to be interesting to each other, and now you've found someone who finds you interesting again. And you hate me for it." "No, Rick. I don't hate you for it. I understand it." The surprise on his face was almost comical. "You understand it? Do you remember what you said to me the night before our wedding? You were so nervous, you could barely sleep. You kept talking about all the things you wanted to do, places you wanted to go, dreams you had. You said you hoped I wouldn't get bored with you, that you'd try to keep being someone worth loving." "I remember." "When did we stop trying to be worth loving to each other?" Rick was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. "I don't know. It happened so gradually. We got busy with the kids, with work, with just living. And then one day I looked around and realized I felt like a stranger in my own life." "And Deanna makes you feel like yourself again?" "Yes." The admission was barely a whisper. I nodded, feeling surprisingly calm. "Then you need to decide what you're going to do about that." "What do you mean?" "I mean you can't have both worlds, Rick. You can't keep me as your comfortable wife while you rediscover yourself with Diana. It's not fair to any of us." "So what are my choices?" I moved back to the table and sat down, looking directly at him. "You can end things with Diana and we can try to rebuild what we have. Really try, not just go back to the way things were, but actually work on becoming interesting to each other again. Or you can be honest about what you really want and we can figure out how to end our marriage with dignity. The word divorce hung in the air between us without being spoken. Rick's face went pale. Maggie, I can't just throw away 45 years. You're not throwing them away. Those years happened. They were real. Our children, our memories. The life we built together, none of that disappears. But Rick, we can't keep living like roommates just because we have history. What about the kids? The grandchildren? What would everyone think? The kids want us to be happy. And everyone else. Their opinions don't get a vote in how we live our lives. Rick stood up abruptly and began pacing around the kitchen. This is crazy. People our age don't get divorced, we work things out. We compromise, we settle, I finished. Is that what you want? To settle for a marriage where neither of us is truly happy, just because it's easier than making a change? I don't know. His voice cracked with frustration. I don't know what I want, Maggie. I love Diana, but I love you too. Differently, but I do love you. You're my best friend, my partner, the mother of my children. How do I choose between that history and feeling alive again? Maybe you don't have to choose right now. But you do have to stop lying. To me, to Diana, and to yourself. What does that mean? I took a deep breath. It means you need to tell Diana the truth about us. About what's really going on. She doesn't know? Rick, she thinks you're happily married. She's not some home wrecker trying to steal another woman's husband. She's a lonely widow who's fallen for a man she believes is committed to his wife but enjoys her friendship. How do you know what she thinks? Because I watched her at dinner last night. She was uncomfortable every time you paid too much attention to her while I was sitting right there. She kept trying to include me in conversations. She's not trying to hurt anyone. Rick sank back into his chair. God, what have I done? You fell in love. It's not a crime, Rick. But keeping everyone in the dark about it is cruel. So what do you want me to do? I want you to think about what kind of man you want to be. And then I want you to act like that man. We sat in silence for several minutes, both of us lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Rick looked up at me. What about you, Maggie? What do you want? It was the first time in months that he'd asked me what I wanted, and the question caught me off guard. I want to be happy, I said simply. I want to wake up each morning looking forward to my day. I want to have conversations that matter and laugh about things that are funny and feel like my life has purpose. Can you have that with me? I don't know. Can you have that with me? I don't know either. Then maybe that's our answer. Later that morning, after Rick left for another errand, and we both knew where he was going, I called Eleanor. How did the dinner go? She asked immediately. Interesting. Very interesting. I told her about meeting Diana, about the conversation with Rick, about the strange sense of clarity that had settled over me. So what happens now? Ellie asked. Now I figure out who I am when I'm not just Rick's wife? What do you mean? I mean, I've been half of a couple for so long that I'm not sure I remember how to be a whole person by myself. But I think I'd like to find out. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove to the art supply store and bought a sketch pad, some pencils, and a small set of watercolors. I'd loved to draw when I was younger, before marriage and children and life got in the way. I sat up at our kitchen table and tried to remember how to see things with an artist's eye. The light falling across the room, the way shadows created depth and texture, the simple beauty of everyday objects. It felt awkward at first, my hand uncertain, my eye unpracticed. But gradually something began to emerge on the paper. Nothing spectacular, just a simple sketch of the view from our kitchen window. But it was mine. Something I'd created, not because anyone needed it or expected it, but because I wanted to. When Rick came home that evening, he found me still at the table, surrounded by pencil shavings and smudged paper. What's all this? He asked. I'm drawing, I said simply. I didn't know you drew. I used to. Before we got married. Before the kids. I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed it. He picked up one of my sketches, a simple drawing of our old maple tree, and studied it carefully. This is really good, Maggie. I had no idea you were so talented. And there it was, the problem with our marriage in one sentence. After 45 years together, Rick had no idea I was talented at something I'd once loved. Just like I'd had no idea he felt invisible in his own life. We'd stopped seeing each other as individuals and started seeing each other as roles. He was the husband, I was the wife. We'd forgotten that underneath those labels were two separate people with their own dreams and interests and untapped potential. There's a lot you don't know about me, Rick, I said gently. Just like there's probably a lot I don't know about you anymore. He nodded slowly, still looking at my drawing. Maybe that's part of the problem. Or maybe, I said, who's part of the solution? For 3 days after our kitchen table conversation, Rick moved through our house like a man carrying a heavy burden. He'd start to say something, then stop. He'd pick up his phone to make a call, then set it down again. I watched him wrestle with himself, and for the first time in months, I felt sorry for him. On Wednesday evening, as I was working on a new sketch, this one of our old wedding photo, sitting on the mantel, Rick finally found his courage. "I'm going to tell her," he said quietly. I looked up from my drawing. "Deanna, yes, tomorrow, I'm going to tell her about us, about what's been happening, about what I need to decide. How do you think she'll react?" Rick sat down across from me, his face drawn with worry. "I think she'll be hurt. Angry, she might never want to see me again." "Is that what you're afraid of?" "Partly. But mostly I'm afraid of hurting her. She's been through enough pain already." It struck me that Rick was more worried about hurting Diana than he'd ever seemed to be about hurting me. Not because he was cruel, but because he'd taken my resilience for granted for so long that he'd forgotten I could be wounded too. "Rick," I said gently, "you're going to hurt her more by continuing to lie than by telling her the truth now." "I know, I hate that I got everyone into this mess. We all got ourselves into this mess. Diana chose to get involved with a married man, even if she didn't understand the full situation. I chose to stay silent instead of confronting our problems earlier. And you chose to look for happiness outside our marriage, instead of working on it from within. So what do we do now?" I set down my pencil and looked at this man I'd shared most of my life with. "Now we all start making better choices." The next morning, Rick left the house looking like he was walking to his execution. I knew he was meeting Diana at their usual coffee shop, and I knew he was finally going to tell her everything. I found myself thinking about Diana as I went through my morning routine. What would I do in her position? How would I react to learning that the man I'd fallen in love with had been lying to me about the state of his marriage? Around noon, Eleanor called. "Want some company? You sound like you could use a friend today." 20 minutes later, we were sitting in my living room with tea and the cookies Ellie had brought from the bakery. "So today's the day?" she asked. "Rick's telling Diana the truth as we speak. How are you feeling about it?" I thought about the question. Relieved, mostly, and nervous. Once he tells her, everything changes. There's no going back to pretending our marriage is fine. Do you want to go back to pretending? No, but it's scary, you know? I'm 72 years old, Ellie. What if Rick decides he wants to be with Diana? What if I end up alone for the first time in my adult life? Eleanor reached over and squeezed my hand. "Mija, you've never been alone. You've always had yourself. Maybe it's time you got reacquainted. I've been thinking about that, about who I am when I'm not somebody's wife or mother or grandmother. I'm not sure I know anymore. So find out. You've got time, you've got your health, you've got friends who love you. That's more than a lot of people have to work with." We talked for another hour about possibilities, things I might want to do, places I might want to go, dreams I'd put on hold for so long I'd almost forgotten I'd had them. By the time Ellie left, I was feeling something I hadn't felt in years, excited about my own future. Rick came home at 4 o'clock, looking exhausted. "How did it go?" I asked. "About as well as you'd expect." He sank into his chair and rubbed his face with his hands. She was shocked, then hurt, then angry. She said some things I probably deserved to hear, such as that I was a coward for not being honest with either of you from the beginning. That she never would have gotten involved if she'd known I was lying about my marriage. That she deserved better than to be someone's escape from reality. She was right about all of those things. I know. Rick looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. She ended it, Maggie. She said she couldn't be with someone who would deceive the people he claimed to love. I felt an unexpected pang of sympathy for both of them. "I'm sorry, Rick." "Are you? Really?" "Yes." "Not because she ended it, but because you're in pain. Despite everything, I don't like seeing you hurt." "She asked me to tell you something?" Rick said quietly. "What?" "She said to tell you she was sorry. That she never meant to come between us, and that she hoped someday you might forgive her." Tears pricked at my eyes. Even in her anger and hurt, Diana had thought to send an apology to the woman she'd unknowingly wronged. "She seems like a good person, Rick." "She is. That's what makes this so much harder. So what happens now?" Rick was quiet for a long time, staring out the window. "She said something else. She said that if I really loved her, I'd figure out how to be the kind of man who deserved love. Someone who was honest and brave and willing to face hard truths. What do you think she meant by that? I think she meant I need to decide what I really want from my life, and then have the courage to pursue it honestly. No more lies, no more taking the easy way out. And what do you want, Rick? He turned to look at me directly. I want to be happy. I want to wake up every morning glad to be alive. I want to have conversations that matter and do things that feel meaningful. I want to love someone and have them love me back. Not just because we've been together forever, but because we choose each other every day. Can you have that with me? I don't know. Can we have that with each other? It was the question we'd been dancing around for days. The heart of everything? I think, I said slowly, that we could try. But Rick, it would mean starting over. Not just going back to the way things were, but building something completely new. We'd have to get to know each other again, like we were dating. We'd have to decide to choose each other every day, like you said. And we'd both have to be willing to do the work. Are you willing to do that work? I don't know yet. Are you? I don't know either. Then maybe we need to find out. That evening, we did something we hadn't done in years. Instead of eating dinner in front of the television, we sat at the kitchen table and talked. Really talked. I told Rick about my art, about how rediscovering drawing was making me remember parts of myself I'd forgotten. He told me about feeling invisible in his own life, free about the loneliness of going through the motions of living without feeling truly alive. We talked about our children, about moments of joy and pride we'd shared but never really discussed. We talked about our parents, about lessons we'd learned and mistakes we'd made. We talked about growing older and what we hoped the rest of our lives might look like. It wasn't easy conversation. There were tears, moments of anger, long silences. But it was honest in a way we hadn't been with each other in years. You know what I realized today? Rick said as we were cleaning up the dinner dishes. What? I don't just want to be happy. I want to make someone else happy too. And I haven't made you happy in a very long time. No, I agreed. You haven't. But I haven't made you happy either. So the question is, do we think we can learn how to make each other happy again? I dried the last plate and hung up the dish towel, considering his question. I think the first step might be learning how to make ourselves happy. Maybe we can't give each other what we need until we figure out what that is. What do you mean? I mean, maybe we should take some time, not to see other people, but to rediscover ourselves, to figure out who we are as individuals before we try to figure out who we might be as a couple. Rick frowned. Like a separation? Not exactly. More like space. Time to pursue our own interests, make our own friends, have our own experiences, and then see if the people we become still want to be married to each other. That sounds terrifying. Yes, I said. It does. But Rick, what we've been doing hasn't been working. Maybe it's time to try something different. What if we grow apart instead of together? Then at least we'll know. At least we'll have been honest about it instead of just going through the motions until one of us dies. Rick was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Okay, let's try it. But Maggie? Yes? I want you to know that even if this doesn't work out the way we hope, you've been the most important person in my life for 45 years. Whatever happens, that won't change. I felt tears in my eyes as I reached over and took his hand. You've been the most important person in my life too, Rick. And whatever we decide, I'll always love you. Maybe not the way I did when we were 25, but in a way that honors everything we've shared. So what do we do now? I looked around our kitchen. This room where we'd fed our children and celebrated holidays and argued about money and made up after fights. 45 years of life had happened in this room. Now, I said, we start figuring out what the rest of our story looks like. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new apartment, putting the finishing touches on a watercolor painting of the view from my kitchen window. Not the old kitchen window in the house I'd shared with Rick for 30 years, but my new kitchen window in the sunny two-bedroom apartment I'd rented on the other side of town. The painting wasn't very good yet. I had years of practice to make up for, but it was mine. It, like the apartment, like the schedule I kept, like the decisions I made every day about how to spend my time and energy. Rick and I had tried, for 3 months. We'd worked harder on our marriage than we had in years. We went to counseling, planned date nights, shared our thoughts and feelings with the kind of honesty that was sometimes painful, but always real. And we discovered something that was both sad and liberating. We'd grown into different people who wanted different things from life. Rick wanted adventure, new experiences, the excitement of discovery. At 74, he'd realized he'd spent most of his life being careful and responsible, and he wanted to take some risks while he still could. I wanted peace, creativity, deep friendships, and the joy of pursuing interests I'd always put on the back burner. I wanted to wake up each morning with a sense of purpose that came from within, not from taking care of someone else. We'd both wanted to be happy, but our visions of happiness were pulling us in opposite directions. The decision to separate hadn't been dramatic or angry. It had been sad and gentle and surprisingly mutual. We'd been sitting in our couple's counselor's office, talking about our individual goals, when Rick had stopped mid-sentence and looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Maggie," he'd said quietly, "I think we want to spend our remaining years living different kinds of lives." Yes, I'd agreed, my own eyes filling up. I think we do. Does that make us failures? No, Rick. I think it makes us honest. The divorce was quiet and civilized. We divided our assets fairly, agreed on how to tell the children and grandchildren, and promised to remain friends. Rick kept the house he needed the extra bedrooms for when the kids visited, and I found my apartment with its big windows and small garden. Our children had been shocked at first, then surprisingly supportive. Sarah had cried and asked if there was anything she could do to help us work things out. Michael had been angry initially, accusing us of being selfish and giving up too easily. But when we explained that we weren't giving up on love, we were giving each other the freedom to find the kinds of love that would make us truly happy, they began to understand. "I want you both to be genuinely happy," Sarah had said during one of our family meetings. "Not just comfortable or settled, but really, truly happy. If that means being apart, then maybe that's the right choice." Now, 6 months later, I was discovering what genuine happiness felt like. I joined the community art center and was taking painting classes 3 times a week. I'd made new friends, women who shared my interests, who challenged me intellectually, who made me laugh until my sides hurt. I'd started volunteering at the animal shelter, something I'd always wanted to do, but Rick had been allergic to cats. I'd adopted a small tabby named Winston who sat by my easel while I painted and filled my quiet apartment with purrs. I'd begun traveling, taking small trips to nearby cities to visit museums and galleries. Eleanor often came with me, and we'd become the kind of close friends who could spend hours talking or sit in comfortable silence. Most surprisingly, I'd started dating. His name was Frank Morrison, a widowed retired professor I'd met at the art center. He was kind and interesting and made me feel attractive and intelligent. We took things slowly, getting to know each other without the weight of 45 years of shared history and unspoken expectations. It was different from what I'd had with Rick, less intense, perhaps, but also less complicated. Frank and I chose to spend time together because we enjoyed each other's company, not because we'd promised to 50 years ago or because it was easier than being alone. Rick, meanwhile, had surprised everyone by selling the house and buying an RV. He was traveling around the country, something he'd always dreamed of doing. He sent me postcards from national parks and small towns, sharing stories of people he'd met and sights he'd seen. He seemed genuinely happy, more like the adventurous young man I'd married than he'd been in years, and I was genuinely happy for him. We still talked occasionally, checking in on each other, sharing news about the children and grandchildren. The anger and hurt had faded, replaced by a kind of fond affection for the life we'd shared and gratitude for the growth we'd each experienced since. There had been one uncomfortable moment, about 3 months after our separation became final. I'd run into Diana Walsh at the grocery store. She'd looked uncertain, probably wondering if I'd make a scene or say something hurtful. Instead, I'd walked over to her cart and smiled. "Hello, Diana, how are you doing?" "Maggie," she'd said, clearly surprised. I'm fine. How are you?" "I'm well, really well, actually." We'd talked for a few minutes, polite conversation about the weather and mutual acquaintances. As we were saying goodbye, Deanna had touched my arm gently. "Maggie, I want you to know how sorry I am about everything. I never meant." "I know," I'd interrupted kindly. "And Deanna, you don't need to apologize. What happened with Rick wasn't about you taking something away from me. It was about him finally admitting he was unhappy and doing something about it. In a way, you helped us both face the truth. But your marriage..." "My marriage ended because Rick and I had stopped being partners and started being strangers who shared a house. That's not your fault. That's something we did to ourselves over many years," Diana had looked at me with tears in her eyes. I don't know many women who would be so understanding. I'm 73 years old, Diana. I don't have time to hold grudges, especially when they serve no purpose. I hope you're happy. I hope you find someone who can love you with his whole heart. Thank you, she'd whispered. As I'd walked away, I'd felt a lightness I hadn't expected. Forgiveness, I'd realized, wasn't just about being kind to others. It was about freeing yourself from the weight of anger and resentment. Now, sitting in my sunny apartment with Winston purring in my lap and my latest painting drying on the easel, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. A year ago, I would have said my life was over if Rick left me. I would have believed that at 72, I was too old to start over, too set in my ways to learn new things, too scared to be alone. I would have been wrong about all of it. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Sarah, calling for our weekly check-in. Hi, Mom. How are you doing? I'm wonderful, sweetheart. I just finished a painting and Frank is taking me to that new Italian restaurant tonight. I'm so glad you're happy, Mom. Really glad. How are the kids? How's Tom? We chatted for 20 minutes about her family, her job, the garden she was planning for spring. Near the end of the call, Sarah asked the question she'd been asking for months. Any regrets, Mom? About Dad? About the divorce? I looked around my small apartment with its carefully chosen furniture and walls covered with my own artwork. I thought about my full calendar of activities and social engagements, about the new friends I'd made and the interests I was pursuing. No regrets, I said firmly. Your father and I gave each other 45 good years, 2 wonderful children, and 4 amazing grandchildren. That's nothing to regret. And now we're both living the kinds of lives that make us genuinely happy. That's not something to regret either. I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart. After we hung up, I walked to my kitchen window and looked out at the small garden I'd planted. The roses were blooming, bright red against the white fence. Winston jumped onto the windowsill beside me, purring as he watched birds at the feeder I'd hung from the maple tree. This wasn't the life I'd expected to have at 73. But it was the life I'd chosen, and that made all the difference. My phone buzzed with a text message from Frank, looking forward to dinner tonight. Should I pick you up at 6? I smiled as I typed back, perfect. See you then, at 6 o'clock. I put on my favorite blue dress, the one that Frank had complimented the first time we'd gone out together. I checked my appearance in the mirror, noting the laugh lines around my eyes and the silver in my hair that I'd stopped coloring months ago. I looked like a 73-year-old woman who was living her life fully and authentically. I looked like someone who'd learned the difference between being comfortable and being happy. When Frank knocked on my door, his face lit up at the sight of me, just as it always did. He offered me his arm, and together we walked to his car. You look beautiful tonight, Maggie, he said as he opened the passenger door for me. Thank you, Frank. I feel beautiful, and I did. Not because I looked like I was 20 again, but because I felt like myself again, like a woman with her own interests, her own opinions, her own dreams for the future. As we drove toward the restaurant, I thought about the note I'd found in Rick's pocket all those months ago. You make me feel alive again. I'd spent so many years trying to make other people happy that I'd forgotten how to make myself feel alive. But I'd learned, at 73, I'd learned that it's never too late to rediscover yourself, to try new things, to choose happiness over security. Rick had loved me for 45 years, until another woman entered our lives and showed us both what we were missing. I'd thought that was the end of my story. I'd been wrong. It was just the beginning of a new chapter. And this chapter, I was writing for myself. Epilogue: 2 years later, I received a postcard from Rick. He was in Montana, traveling with a group of retirees in a caravan of RVs. The picture showed a stunning mountain sunset. On the back, he'd written, Maggie, thought you'd appreciate this view. Met a nice woman named Carol here, a widow from Oregon who loves hiking and adventure. Taking things slow, but she makes me laugh. Hope you're well. Still think about you fondly. Rick. I smiled as I propped the postcard on my kitchen windowsill next to the others he'd sent. I was genuinely happy that he'd found someone who shared his love of adventure. Frank and I had been together for over a year now, and while we hadn't married, we'd moved in together. My apartment had become our apartment, filled with his books and my paintings, his classical music and my jazz records. We'd traveled to Europe together, something I'd always dreamed of doing. We'd visited art museums in Paris, taken cooking classes in Tuscany, walked along the beaches of Greece. At 75, I was having adventures I'd never imagined possible. I'd also reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with during my marriage. Women who were now widowed or divorced themselves and eager for companionship and new experiences. My art had improved dramatically. I'd even sold a few pieces at local gallery shows, something that filled me with a pride I'd never felt during my years as a housewife. Most importantly, I'd learned to value my own company. I spent mornings alone with my coffee and my sketchbook, and I treasured those quiet hours of solitude and creativity. If someone had told me 5 years ago that my marriage would end and I'd be happier than I'd ever been, I wouldn't have believed them. But life, I'd learned, is full of surprises. The story I'd thought was ending when I found that note in Rick's pocket had actually been just beginning. And the best chapters, it turned out, were still ahead of me. Sometimes love means holding on. Sometimes it means letting go. And sometimes it means loving yourself enough to discover who you really are. At 75, I was finally finding out.